So our guest today is Senior Advocate Pinky Anand, one of India's most distinguished legal minds. From breaking barriers for women in litigation and representing Union of India at the highest levels, and now serving as a judge at Bahrain International Commercial Court, her journey has truly been remarkable. Thank you so much for joining us. So, I would like to begin with the environment you entered when you first stepped into litigation. When you entered profession, it was an old boys club. So, did you have to redefine your own rules or you just had to fit in?
Firstly, the old boys club hasn't changed. It was there, it continues there. Yeah, the intensity keeps changing, but the intensity, in fact, if anything, might at one stage be even higher. And there's a reason for it. I'll come to that later. But having said that, you come to the redefinition, as you say, whether it's redefining or following into the rules. Firstly, I, as a general theme, believe in following rules. I've been trained from my childhood by my mother to say, if there's a rule, follow it. But this wasn't a rule that we are talking about. This was a life. And this was a life that we chosen to make a mark in. I don't think I've ever allowed my destinations or my ambitions or my directions or my goals, putting it better, to be defined by anybody. I think my goals are my goals, and that's what everybody really stands for, an individual. So I would define a goal, sometimes not even define it, just move towards a goal. You know, meal ka patthar pada hai, and kind of moving towards it and not thinking of how you are making it there, but basically heading in that direction and trying to make it. So I've always believed in working hard to achieve what I look at as a delivery for that entire destination. And for that reason, I didn't really follow any rules, none, not even my own rules. I just followed a direction and I followed a path and I followed a foresight into saying, okay, I want to do this. And thankfully, God was kind. And I think my entire environment was very encouraging in that perspective. I was never told I couldn't do anything or I could do something. So therefore, there was never any barrier, whether it was to go into even literally some part of politics, whether it was to do television, whether it was to play tennis, whether it was to ride a bike. I mean, it all fell into place. And as far as the profession is concerned, I mean, honestly speaking, people keep saying, you know, in our times, that is like eons back, there was a lot of barriers. There were. And people didn't make it. Most women went in for purposes of getting into education, becoming a professor, lecturer, administrative services, you know, a stopgap kind of arrangement, or even to just be there till they got married. But when we started, basically, our aim was to make it as a profession. And from the beginning, that's the orientation, that we are going to make it into a profession which takes us to the highest folds of life. And actually, law ultimately does contribute so heavily into how life is evolved. And you help to evolve life, not only how life is evolved, but really the whole process of law is a tool for change. And I do believe that very strongly. And I think time has shown that, particularly in the Indian context. I think the way we have gone over so many milestones, if you look back centuries, and maybe we can, you know, put that up later. But there's been a whole destination. But talking about barriers, so here was the thing. I was asked to stand for the Delhi University Students' Union elections. And I hadn't really been actively involved in anything like that process before. And that was a first ever. So there was never a woman secretary into. So as much as today you have in women representation in the bar councils and in the bar associations, all these questions were there then in two different forums. But I was asked to stand, and I did stand, and I did win. The question is, and the whole process, in fact, was so encouraging. So I really strongly believe that my life, the way public life gave me an opportunity into being a part of the entire process. Delhi University Students' Union had about 1.5 lakh students, even at that time. So you basically had a large circumference. You had about 66 colleges all over Delhi, and it included places that I didn't know. So the whole process of campaigning, associating, involving, dealing with issues. See, lawyers and really this public life and politics, call it whichever way, is a very strong mix. So I think that kind of exposure really helped me, push me into another forefront. The other thing which did help a lot was debating. I think debating, and I believe that I would really at one stage encourage everybody. And I'm glad you are doing this. This is the kind of thing you need public performance. You need to be out there in the open. You need to be able to articulate. You need to be able to think. You need to be able to evaluate. And these are the kinds of things that, public perceptions, public involvement, public speaking, and we in India generally still run shy of that.
Yeah.
I think that's something we need to really come out in the open, particularly women. I mean, women are not encouraged so much to speak. You should be seen, not heard. That's a kind of still pervasive thing that goes across. That really doesn't work. You just have to be out there, because unless you are there, your exposure to life, your exposure to connect, your exposure to articulate yourself into a field, and then to make good that's what's needed.
What would be the subtle biases which you think existed for women lawyers back then and still prevail even today?
I think the basic subtle bias that exists is, something like, you don't think a woman is good enough. And you don't think that she can do the same kind of job that a man can do. Particularly, I'm talking about law at this point of time. I mean, the idea is that if it's a brief. So let me give you one very good example that keeps coming up now. So we were discussing about the labor code recently, which came into India. And in that context, we were talking about how it is believed that women are not good in finance. Women are not good in commerce. They're very good for, let's say, family law. They're very good for human rights kind of issues. They're very good for possibly environment. But they're not good enough for commercial law, because even their maths is kind of questionable. And to that end, I do believe that these kind of biases that exist down the educational system, that you really don't educate women into finances because they're not involved. And I say they because I was. I've always been involved, so I've had no real issue. My oral maths is also pretty good. I can still accumulate and assimilate and multiply fairly decently. I'm not saying the best, but still decently enough. But you really need that involvement. And life actually shows you that when you have exposure, it's like driving. Women will not drive very often, because you'll be scared. Those kind of images that come down the route, I think, go across the surface. So same thing for criminal law. Now, whenever a woman wanted to go to criminal law and to work in that field in litigation, it was always said, no, it's not good enough for you, because it's not safe for you. They are criminals, they are bad people. What is bad and what is good? When you are into law and the profession, you are giving a defense, you are giving an offense, depending on what the situation might be, to a client. And that is in pursuance of the due process of law, and we have a very good system. I must say that whatever it is, we in India have developed really a good resilience into the whole system. In fact, sometimes over much. We do so much in the sense of providing access to justice in the due process of law and to follow the entire rigors of law, that it's actually a very good kind of system. But coming back, you did find that women would confine themselves in my time as much as sometimes even now, though it's really changed a lot. I mean, the surface has changed. So you would find women not as individual practitioners at that time. They would join somebody. They would become juniors. They would go into other professions, but they would not really take up their own field into their own rights, so to say. So you didn't find that progress happening. You didn't find women into law firms as much. Law firms, again, as juniors, yes, and as associates, yes, but not anything further. The ambition also of making it to the top was missing. So you didn't want to think that you could become a partner in a law firm, let's say, for example, or you could become a senior advocate. You know how late women became senior advocates? I mean, and there were just a handful of women. Even now, I mean, the percentage is fairly low. It's made up a lot. I mean, recently we've had a number of appointments, but basically you have what? Less than maybe 7% or 6% is roughly the figure that would be prevailing. So the whole circumference is that you need to be put into place. And that's why the whole debate keeps happening time and again. When you talk about biases, as far as personally I'm concerned, honestly, I keep saying it wasn't really as tough. Didn't ever have to feel that you're kind of breaking your head against a wall. That sensation I've not had. A lot of people may have had it, but I really haven't faced it. And that's somehow because one had the protection of people believing that you could do what you set out to do. And that demonstrated partly, and also, I must say, public life also helps. Because you're there as a let's say, leader. Right. You're there as somebody who has the confidence of the people. So you take that confidence across with you. And I suppose if you're able to portray that confidence, people do seem to accept you as that capacity. I do believe that when I joined the profession, there used to be a lot of canteen talk in the bar canteen and others about what one was all about and where one was headed towards, or what the personality was. And these are the kind of things that happen. But people actually, I remember a number of senior colleagues also, we used to sit and chat with us, and we used to chat as colleagues. it wasn't in a sense of an oblivion to say you're in a different domain, which is another exclusion, by the way. The talking across, the dealing with each other's contemporaries. Otherwise, women by and large are segregated. So you'll find even in a party. I mean, if you go to a party, you'll find women sitting separately and men sitting separately. And I would invariably be sitting somewhere, if at the least in the middle, at the least, and normally more towards, in any case, with my male colleagues, whichever way it went, and the conversation would go like that. So I think one of the greatest sources of discrimination is the way that women are brought up into believing what they might be and what they should not be doing. And I think that changes the focus of everybody. So women should not be dealing with politics. Women should not be talking about commerce. Women should not be talking about finance. Women should not be loud. Women should not be aggressive. And that's, by the way, the worst thing, I think. In law, people say, well, women should not be aggressive. Well, why shouldn't you be aggressive if you have to be? I'm not saying you must be, but if an occasion demands, and today, honestly speaking, as lawyers go, I think the kind of interruptions we do, the kind of overreaching that happens in a lot of ways, and it's allowed to happen. Whether it should be or not, I'm not going there. But since it happens, that's when you say the rules of the game. If the rules of the game demand that you need to be aggressive, well, so be it. Then the docile kind of behavior and saying hands off and chudi pehen lo varieties will not work. It can't. So I think this categorization, this stereotyping, saying, okay, you must behave like this, or this is the way women should behave, I think is our greatest impediment that comes across. I remember Leela Seth. She became the first Chief Justice, as you know, of the country. And then when she was talking, she said, I was handed over a brief and somebody said, well, I don't think she can do this job as well as a male colleague. And then you have to prove yourself. So I think that is something that women have to do. You still have to be twice as good as a man, or at least show yourself to be twice as good as a man to be able to reach one level of what the man is. So I mean, that's the equation that still flows from there. Dramatic changes have been made and it will take its own time. But I think we've fast forwarded the steps in a number of directions. So, as I said, women's reservation. I done the matter in the Supreme Court for appointment or reservation of seats for bar councils and for the associations. And we've really had the judiciary up in complete league with the entire proposition that, women must make their mark. So, we've had various reservations, and recently also there was, of course, a move for the president to be reserved, which hasn't happened, but there's been reservation for the office bearers, there's been reservation for women seniors, there's been reservation for women executive members, and I think that's what translates into its own, because to be at the helm of affairs as far as the associations are concerned, the bar councils are concerned, would make a tremendous difference in the standing of women. And overall, you talk about the old boys club, I think the one Justice Simran Kohli is the one who's kind of floated this thing a lot in her conversations. And I remember at a time when Chief Justice Ramanna was there a few years back, and he was talking, and people talk about reservation of 33%. He said there should be 50%. Anyway, I don't want to go there. I don't think reservation is the only answer, but reservation is an answer. And it must be used, if not definitely not ever. It must be transitory. You come to a position, and that's what I believe reservation should do. Get you into a general position perspective, and then you have to take the leaps on your own. Nobody can swim for you, and nobody can stay alive in the ocean for you. You have to do that on your own. So you must make your mark there.
That's true. So you've spoken about perception, how women are perceived. So now any young woman who's entering either law or public life in general, what do you think, what mindset or attitude they should have, and what mindset or attitude would work more than talent itself? Because talent alone wouldn't work, right?
No, talent alone cannot.
So what attitude or mindset that women should have?
I mean, talent is needed for a purpose of demonstrating once you're out there. That's demonstrating it there in the sense of strategy, in the sense of what you need, what causes you need to pick up, the threads you need to pick up, the direction you need to pick up. That's where the talent comes in. Knowledge, particularly. Knowledge is a lot. But ultimately, the attitude that a woman could have in going out in public life or in litigation is basically to understand that I'll tell you one thing which bothers me. I think women sometimes don't accept the fact that they can be ambitious or that they want to achieve a target. I mean, again, I think morally, somehow the other women are taught that don't believe that you need to achieve something. That's not a good thing. In a sense, it's in some directions, yes, education, for example, and all that, very good. But beyond that, you can't want more, or you can't compete more. That's not a good thing. Now, these are the things that I think one needs out of. You really need to get there and say, all right, if as I said, whatever the rules of the game are at that point of time, for purposes of making it to the top, whether it's aggressive or whether it is ultimately competing, whether it is marketing, whatever the process takes. I mean, ultimately you have to be there. You can't be shy. I mean, sitting, for example, this whole camaraderie that men would have in a bar and other things. Women shouldn't drink, women shouldn't go out, women shouldn't do this. I mean, all these things, of course, as I said, tremendous changes. None of you are the same as we were. But in any case, even in our times, we were able to have a lot of liberty. As I said, particularly because of the environment that one grew up in. So, I think one had the entire input coming in from there.
It starts from the home, basically.
It does start from the home and your friends and your family. It's not home alone. Home is the biggest thing, of course. But then once that says, so your teachers, your peers, your colleagues, your friends, because really speaking for people to accept it. For example, I'll tell you a small example. Even some of my friends who weren't there out in the open, in the sense of into big time academics or professional life, during election time, all my friends came with me. And believe me, going in elections is not easy. I mean, when you're out on the streets, and it means the streets, whether it's the colleges and you go there, it's a whole different bandwidth.
You've mentioned about elections. So here I would like to ask you, do you think, see, it's a given that there's an intersection between law and politics. So can law be ever apolitical?
I don't believe so. I don't think law can ever be apolitical. I don't believe in any case, I'll tell you honestly speaking, Indians are very strongly political, particularly from some of the hinterlands. You'll find that everybody there has politics on their life and brain, and I'm not talking about law alone. But having said that, law is such a strong connect. Everything that we are doing in terms of, you see the recent positions of, West Bengal, you see the recent positions of Tamil Nadu as we speak. I mean, everything is a matter of something which is going to whether the power of the governor, the power of the president, the position that happens. And I don't want to comment on what must come out of it, but these are the positions that are out there. It's been there in Goa, it's been there in Jharkhand, it's been there in, every other state that you can think about. So there's no way that you can be out of it. And thankfully, in fact, I believe law is a very, very strong connect with politics. And I do believe that it keeps you going in every which way direction. I mean, whether you talk about women's reservation bill in the parliament, just everywhere we go, we are dealing with law. And my strong belief is law is a tool for social change.
Your initial years of you mentioning you fighting elections, how it has built you as a lawyer.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, come on.
And even connecting with, after that also you pursued politics. So how is it connected, the whole journey?
In every which way. I think, I would have been happy if I had done even further in politics. Let's put it very strongly, but maybe one just didn't get an opportunity at the right time. But having said that, whatever one did do, even do so was my greatest moments. My being there for 2 years as the joint secretary and then the secretary. And maybe if I hadn't gone to Harvard, I might have thought about or considered president, but then I went off to Harvard to study, so that broke the chain. Obviously, I was done with university in the sense of I had completed my LLB after that. But I think it was a great experience because just dealing with people and understanding people, I think we cannot make silos out of our own lives. We can't just sit back and say, no, this is what I think and this is what is good. Professionally, you must, because professionally you have to take a call and say, I take a decision, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I need to do and this is what I need to make this work. So strategy and everything else. But aside from that, the silos that we create as individuals is something that you can walk out of if you do public life, you do politics and you associate that. Because you see different class of people. Otherwise, you are isolated in your own categorization, in your own type of people, in your own, whoever does whatever you do in your way. So there's a close-knit circle and that's where you remain and you remain isolated there. So, I'll tell you, for example, I'd gone with one of my colleagues in one of the political discussions and I was sitting on the floor and I had cross-legged on the floor itself and she started laughing. I was drinking out of steel glass with putting it in the katori and having water in that. And she said, ma'am, I said, yes, this is fine, please sit. It's another matter that I also grew up that way. So it's not that I grew up sitting on chairs and sofas all the time. I grew up the old Delhi way, so I've had my own great advantages. So everybody laughs at me and says, you are so proud of the fact that you've been born and brought up in old Delhi. I said, I'm very happy because I have learned to play kanchas on the street and I can still play on the table also. So that's fine. As long as you can do the least, you can do the best. If you can do the best, you can't do the least, for sure. And I think that's a connect that I'm talking about. Different people, different, and believe me, the value system. You learn to value humans. You learn to value humans if you deal with them and their way of thinking. So you translate at times. Maybe you can't translate all of it in your own life, but at least you learn to understand, and that's what you learn to understand the Indian ethos and say, okay, this is what India is about. This is what we are about. This is what the world is about.
So you mentioned about Harvard. You studied at Harvard, and even today there are people from generations. They are crazy about going to foreign to study foreign education. Like people prioritize foreign education here in India a lot. What drew you towards Harvard, and what makes this generation go crazy for foreign education? Do you think we over romanticize foreign education?
Yes and no. So, I mean, we over romanticize, that's for sure. And so it is also one of my dreams when I grew up and went down the line. I mean, everybody wanted to go abroad, whether it was either England, US was a little lesser. So, England was a little higher down the ranks, and almost everybody, for example, in West Bengal, for example, even in Delhi, you would have people going to UK principally. But the idea of higher education was a big thing. I mean, going there, the different type of system, the idea that you would be out in the other country, the idea, actually it all comes from colonial rule. I think principally, we've just grown up thinking that London is the ultimate. And we still retain a lot of it in terms of imagery. We'll grow out of it. So William Wordsworth or Shakespeare or any of these features is something that works. But I mean, I was interested in going. So it's not only US. I was interested in going either to UK or USA. That's why I'm making it clear. But having said that, went down the route, and then I didn't want to spend the huge amounts that the higher education involved, and did apply for the INLACs. INLACs had just started, in fact, at that time. Rhodes was the first. So I applied for Rhodes, didn't get the Rhodes, but was recommended by Rhodes to INLACs automatically. And then Harvard came down, the admissions were separate. So I got Harvard. In fact, initially I got Cornell. So I got my visas and all for Cornell. But then in the meantime, I was told that if I get Harvard, obviously they would transfer the scholarship to Harvard. So Harvard was a dream come true. I tried even earlier, by the way. I mean, I thought it was eligible. I realized that at that time you weren't, because you needed the LLB 3 years before you could go for the LLM, as it's called. And fortunately for us, it was a very popular program, particularly for international students. Indians, I don't think many went to Harvard at that time. You had just a couple here. So Zia, for example, Zia Surabji was one of the earlier people who'd gone. I mean, Benazir Bhutto also went, but that's another example for you. But very few. It was just a handful of people who had gone there. And this is for men and women. Women lesser, but again, so maybe 1/3, or there were like 3 or 4 or 5 people who'd gone at that point to US. And in any case, it was a destination which was in a different league. But found it very exciting. I mean, we did romanticize. So, I mean, Paper Chase is something that I had seen in my time. A movie about a young man in 1971 or something, John Hart, who really wanted to make it in his life at Harvard, and how he basically reconciled the conflict between, not conflict only, but the tryst between academics and real life, and then whatever he could do. And I still remember the classrooms. I think what fascinated me about the whole thing was the classrooms which you could see there, and the kind of method of education, the Socratic method, which we also, not that we don't engage in. And by the way, I do believe that Campus Law Center gave me the best education ever. But there was a difference. There was a difference of class, there was a difference of category, there was a difference of levels, and also perspective. What you do is, when you get out of your own silo, as I say, then you get into another domain, and that gives you an exposure which takes you across. Aside from the fact that even just living on the campus, the whole lifestyle of the campus. I mean, for example, the library there would be open. The Langdale Library at Harvard was open through the day till night. In fact, England doesn't, by the way. England is to close very early. So just found that fascinating. The idea that you could just sit there, work on the table. The sports complexes were open till midnight. So the whole method of approach was a campus way of life, which we still don't have as much in India. But most interestingly, I think what the concentration there, which I found enjoyable, was the analysis. You would analyze. You would not just say, fine, this is good, this is bad. we still tend in India to concentrate on statute-driven statements. So, a statute says this, okay, says this, and then you kind of go down that route. But then you look at why not, where should it go? I mean, we learn that art probably a little better in these kind of educational institutions, and we keep trying to incorporate that into our work and practice.
What changes do you think we need to make here, if you had to?
See, our classrooms are terrific. It's not that they are not, and we do indulge in great academics. But what we really need to do is to develop far more of this courtroom experience. See, today there was a time when people started going into corporate practice, when you had internationalization of law and opening up the globe for India. But that time we went for corporate a lot more. But now again, there is a shift towards litigation by a lot of lawyers, as far as I see. It's always a question mark at times, but I see it like that. So when you talk about litigation, courtrooms have their own significance. And the manner in which you actually present yourself, or what you do there and how you make it good, is yet another exposure. I know we are going towards moot courts, for example, a lot of them, and that's very good. So even I believe a lot of schools, I went to Mahindra University recently, and there they were having even arbitration moots, so to say. So you actually work with given situations. You actually need to understand how to present a case, not only in terms of the note on how and where the case is to go, but how to present it in court and when and what to do. And of course, there's a lot of divergence. It is individual. There's nothing you can do to make it a kind of public thing and say, this is the manner. No, there is no thing, but you need to observe. You need to study. You need to understand. I mean, what a judge is thinking, or what a judge is, the direction in which you're going. It's not that you can take your own direction and just go down that route. I mean, you're being asked something, you need to address it. And you go prepared for something, you'll find that the answers or the questions will be totally different from what you imagine the case would be. I mean, just recently, for example, I was doing a case and it was all prepared down one line, and then a question came, which incidentally we were conscious of it might come, and we were prepared for it, but it was totally different from the main line. So those kind of strategies. Also, I do believe that you need to have fire in the belly for litigation. If you can't do that, you can't make it work, because it needs a lot to make it work. We still are bounded a lot by our civil procedure codes and our criminal procedure codes. And one problem that we have in our country, as we all know, is delay. I mean, delay in disposal of cases. So you really, if you want to work on the cases to make them succeed, you need to understand how to push them forward. You need to ensure that they are heard and dealt with. You need to ensure that you don't stop short, because you can't stop short. If you do that, then there's no point in going for the litigation. As it is, it's a long span. As it is, it's a decently expensive route to ultimately follow. And Indians, by the way, as a habit, we people find that everybody goes right up to the Supreme Court. That's also something that must stop. Everybody must stop going up to the Supreme Court. Everything can't reach there. It's the third or the fourth leg down the litigation route. And the number of routes that we have, we need to curtail them by now, because that's what's costing us by and large on the system. And we say this a lot in the arbitration and commercial world even more. I mean, today we are really the fourth largest economy in the world. We want to be there, and we want Viksit Bharat is down the line, 2047. We expect to be there as the third and the second, but we may reach any level of commerce. But if we can't ensure that we have a dispute resolution process, whether in courts or whether in arbitration or whether negotiation or mediation, in that sense, if you don't have that in place, we will not be able to deliver, and people would not want to then consider India as the option. And we want India. So we are here as leaders in the service industries. We are leaders generally in the commerce industry. What about the legal and the dispute resolution? We want to ensure that we come there. And for that purpose, I do believe this tier system that we have, very good. That's why I earlier said due process of law is something that we are in a way rightly obsessed with, but there's a limit to what we can do. So we must curtail some avenues, whether through administrative measures, whether through judicial measures, or whether through legislative measures. That's something that we need to work upon, because if we can't do that, this protraction is not going to work.
So, what is the distinction between legal knowledge and courtroom intelligence? Like you mentioned, that students now are being prepared in the sense because they are doing more moot court, given real life experiences, what happens inside the court. But this is the one thing which we need to understand. Legal knowledge is something you are learning from law school. But when you step into the court, it's a different environment altogether. So there comes court intelligence. What is that?
Court intelligence is something that really you need to feel. I think it's something that you feel across, and you need to observe across, and you need to have that ingrained in you when you walk in. So I mean, like, I'll tell you one of the small things that I would like to do, and I do. And whether it's in Delhi, in Supreme Court, or whether it's in even outside courts, I like to be sitting in a court as much as I can. I mean, I just don't want to walk in and make a proposition and walk out, as some of us do all the time. But it's something that gives you a complete understanding of what judges are also different. I mean, every judge is has his own mentality, his own thought. I mean, law is supposed to be constant, but you are dealing with adjudicators who are ultimately basing it on their own thought process and sometimes approach. Supreme Court, the level of success is that less than 1% in SLP. So you ultimately have to really make a go of it. But courtroom craft ultimately is to do with one, knowing your entire brief upside down. And people believe that you can actually do it on a perfunctory reading, or you can do it on a minimal reading, or you don't need to go into the depth, which is something that I think we do need to go in. You just can't do the AI way and say, all right, this is the finding, and therefore we step with that. You can't do that. Secondly, you really need to understand where your direction is. Once you've understood the case, where you're headed, and sometimes there's a hidden pocket that is easily available, and you can work that out. The third thing that you really need to do is understand the direction in which the law may take you and how you can walk out of it. So I think we are obsessed with precedent a lot. And rightly so, we base ourselves on common law. We are precedent driven. But at the same time, there is always avenue for a further thought. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, in matters, for example, in some of the commercial matters and arbitration matters, I remember that I was arguing a matter and I just made a proposition, and the judge said that, Miss Anand, is this the proposition you're making? Rather aghast at the fact that I was making it. Not aghast, but at least perplexed. And he was rising for lunch. I said, yes, Manoj, I am, and I'll make it good. And he rose, sat back again for lunch. We argued the matter. It was a huge monetary involvement, financial involvement. And ultimately, that proposition came through. And this is something that I also had to think of. It was not that it just came out of the blue. You just have to consider that this is possible. Now, again, today, I think we are evolving a lot. So there's a lot of development along, let's say, public interest litigation, or larger fields that come across, or the interlink between new fields. For example, mediation has become a big thing today. So how to evolve law within that domain is something that becomes a part of your life. And you think about it. I mean, very often it's like Einstein. You sit at the night and say, an apple hit my head, and then I understood what gravity is. I mean, you read the brief, it makes some direction. After that, sometimes when you're just thinking about it, you come across with something new as a thought. You have to allow your thought to come through. You have to allow your knowledge of how law works. And that knowledge actually comes, I'm afraid, with some experience. It's as much as you talk about any part of life. So that experience that comes in of how courts work, and also different courts. You find Supreme Court working in a certain manner. And then within that, of course, as I said, everybody has their own thought processes also at times. And then you have outside courts, and then you have different kind of manner of presentation. You have different kind of manner of approach, different kind of arguments, different set of pleadings. So you really have to familiarize yourself with each of these processes in order to understand. So as I said, this whole concept of, for example, dealing with local lawyers there, to understand how that court may be working, that is very important as an imperative. And we can't dispense without it. Even local courts, local lawyers within, this is your briefing lawyers. Sometimes, they will give you that vision and say, okay, this is what you need to address. And you take it from there, but you have to go beyond that. You can't even limit yourself to what anybody is saying. What may come out is something quite different from what you aim out for.
Every judicial forum has a distinct culture, would you say? Because you have argued, you have appeared before different forums. So every forum works differently. So how do you navigate through it? Because they do have a different culture. How a Rajasthan High Court functions and how Delhi High Court functions, they are very distinct. And so it applies all across. What would you suggest? How?
I mean, there's nothing but knowledge based upon interaction and experience with local lawyers. I mean, of course, your own experience. So I, in fact, travel fairly widely. So I travel Bombay, I travel Calcutta, I travel Nainital, I travel Madras. I mean, anywhere. It just works across. But you have to understand the culture. And as I said, that's one of the things I said. So I remember when I went to Allahabad High Court, for example, in one of the cases, the first thing I did is I went and sat in the court in the morning, even though my matter was not there. It's another matter that I was asked as courtesy to come and present the case, and it was so presented. But to understand how a court works is something that you need to get in from the ambience as much as somebody telling you. So you actually go and you'll understand a lot better. I mean, if you take the presidency towns, for example, they have a very different culture, even different culture of interaction with local lawyers, the solicitors, and the practice that involves it. So, I mean, again, remembering something, I'd gone to Calcutta for a matter years back, and prepared everything according to my understanding. I'd done it very brightly, so we prepared it on green paper that is prepared, which is not used in Delhi and all that, and prepared it and gone. So even then the solicitor said this can't be filed, and then we were very disappointed. The clients had actually organized the solicitors, so that was going down the drain. And suddenly I remembered a friend and called him. I said, what should we do? This is the problem. And we had a stay only, huge matter, cold matter. And there was a stay only for a limited time. So then he said, don't worry, this is Calcutta. So we can go to the judge's house. I said, but the petition according to the solicitors is not ready. They said, never mind, we'll present it and ask for time to present the main plaint later on. I said, this works. Of course, times change, but this is something that worked. We actually got the stay that we needed to have, and we presented the main petition within a short time thereafter, and it worked. So you really have to vacation period. I mean, I've done this in Delhi, for example. We've done vacation matters or other matters before judges' homes because it was so needed. There was urgency, bails, you needed stay and injunctions in urgent matters. I mean, this happens. So you really have to understand where you need to get it and how. So therefore, Nainital, for example, I mean, a court which works on a very different kind of principle. Ranchi, I mean, courts like that, ultimately you have a very different culture from Delhi. Not only Supreme Court, the High Court also. As a matter of course, I do believe Delhi High Court functions one of the best in the country. I think the efficiency is really, really good, and there's some basic decision on how it works. So, for example, you'll have matters being taken up, come what may. It's not a matter they are finally heard or not, but they are taken up, some decision is taken, some order is passed. A number of other courts sometimes don't get around to that. So there was a time I remember in Ranchi, for example, they would say a matter will come within 4 weeks, and these are bail matters, criminal matters. So you just wondered how you can work. In courts like Patna, for example, sometimes there was time allocation. Bombay also has that, by the way. So you have 2 hours for a certain process, then you have 2 hours for yet another process, and at the end of it, you just don't know. So some matters I went to Bombay, I had to mention the matter like 3 times over for it to be heard. And this is after they are fixed. Same thing happened in Allahabad. UP, it happens a lot also in the Allahabad High Court. So, I mean, you really have to understand how the courts function in order for it to be taken up, for it to be decided. I mean, as I said, decision is yet one part. Sometimes the whole process also takes its own time. And also then within that, what you are aiming for. If you can't get the main relief, that's another art that I think develops a lot in Supreme Court. If you can't get the main relief, at least you get some order which takes you in a certain direction. And sometimes that works even better than getting the main relief. Not even better, but at least as good as that. You get the relief out of that situation. So that target is something that you, again, constantly need to work at. And you do have to understand the sensitivities of people as much as their understanding and much as their orientation. So this entire courtcraft, I think really the only way it works is by getting there.
I think the takeaway, best thing which I've understood is you should sit in the court and observe before your matter comes.
Well, that's one of them. I think it's important.
But that's actually fundamental. It works really well.
Yes.
You can understand the judge. You can understand how the whole environment functions there.
It gets into you.
Yeah.
I believe it actually, it pervades through your system. You really understand how your body and soul kind of tunes on with what's going on.
So, like you advised, every person should master every letter of their brief. So what is the distinction between what distinguishes the good lawyer and an exceptional lawyer?
I think a good lawyer is somebody who's mastered the brief. An exceptional lawyer is somebody who's mastered the brief and in addition understands even better than mastering the brief as to what there is as a takeaway from there. That's what I was saying. So there are several takeaways that you have from a brief, and there are several directions. So some are which are given to you by your local lawyers who will be briefing you and saying, all right, this is the direction. But the final excellence really is understanding where the target is targets are, sorry, I stand corrected, where you have various targets and which of them and how you can really address them. I mean, I think that's really the name of the game. And that's what makes exceptional lawyers. And you find that, I'll tell you, for example, I was working with Soli in a matter years back. And at that time I was briefing him. And incidentally, a very good friend and a very, very great counsel. But Soli, I was telling him, I said, okay, I plan to take this viewpoint, and I gave him two viewpoints. He says, Pinky, aren't they contradictory? And I said, yes, you're right. They are contradictory. And you just have to step back on one of them. They were very good points, but both of them were actually conflicting. So these are the things that you really need to understand, and you have to accept. I think it's also very important. I think the younger generation of today, some of my colleagues, will come up with very strong points. Of course, some of them are acceptable, some of them are not. And then some people like my colleagues here also get very affronted if you don't follow it. But I mean, you have to take a call. I think that's also an essential part of life. That as an excellence, if you like, you hear anything, you hear everything. But at the end of it, the takeaway has to be yours with the help that you get. Because some decisions have to be made. Everything doesn't stick. Everything doesn't work. Everything can't work. But it's always good to be innovative. It's always good to be ingenious. And I think once you head in that direction, our constitution is such an evolving document. And I think we've given ourselves so much bandwidth on the entire interpretations that we are able to constantly develop. So we should never be shy for excellence to actually develop a line of thinking and take it down that route. And sometimes you find that really takes it well across. So you'll find certain judicial precedents that change the entire focus of the legal field as it goes across. And that's where the excellence lies. I think, and the other part I think that is very important is, I do believe as a strong nationalist, that we should take every possible interpretation which works for the society and for the nation. If that is a target, I think it works the best. And I think that's some excellence of great kind. And I find it very encouraging when we can deliver something which improves society, which gives something back to society. I think that is something that law really enables us to do. And that's another field of excellence, I would say, that we have these tools in our hand.
Have you ever been in a position where you have to argue a point, or you have to take a position which you personally disagree with? Because lawyers, at some stage in their career, they have to face that ethical dilemma. So how do you navigate that if you have faced that situation?
I'll tell you, to be honest, I mean, I have a very clear view on ethics and what one should be doing as far as you believing or not believing in something. So I do believe ethically that if you are absolutely against a proposition, don't argue it. And that's the ethics that we've been taught. That then you can't really you can't perform well, you can't deliver to the best of your ability because you're just not convinced. But there are times when within a brief, let's say, there's something that you don't agree with. You don't have to agree with anything. Our duty as a lawyer, as a professional, is to provide the best possible defense, offense, whatever it might be, to a client, to a brief. But beyond that, you don't have to go there. You're not the adjudicators. You're not deciding what is to be done there. So, for example, I'll tell you, it happens mostly in criminal law. In criminal law, there are defenses. Somebody's done something wrong. But that something wrong may not be wrong in law. So, if the person is entitled in law, and that's happened enough times, so you give them the legal defense. And if they are entitled to it, well, that's the way we've been born, and that's what our code of ethics is, and that's what we've sworn to protect. So we do that. But if I'm not convinced, for example, I'll tell you, I would not take up a rape case for an accused because I just didn't believe that they were entitled to a defense. Today, for some reason, it's changed, and I can explain that, because what happens is in matrimonial matters, for example, rape is brought in as a sequence willy-nilly, and therefore you find that there are all these false cases that are coming up. So then one still re-looks at it. But yesteryears, I would just not take up a case for a rape accused if it came down the line. I mean, because you felt, I can't do it. I mean, for example, in the Tandoor Kand, the accused had come to me, and this was when Naina was burnt up. Story long, about 20, 30 years back. Anyway, that happened, and he wanted me to defend. And initially, I was reluctant. I was, in fact, I was saying, how can I do this? Horrified at the situation. But at the end of the day, I felt, okay, if there was a defense possible, I would consider doing it. So you have to be able to give it the best, but not against your conviction if it is. So there are times when I don't believe in something, and that's not only in law, even otherwise. I don't believe in it, I will try and stay away from it. But I don't have too much of resistance. I have very small silos which I stay away from. Generally, I believe I can manage anything. So, for example, as a lawyer, one of the arts is you can argue something which you can make good and actually argue it well, even though it may be against some conviction that you might have. So, it must depend on the weight of that conviction. Where does it matter? If it matters so much, please stop, because then you're out of it. But otherwise, everybody is entitled. I mean, another case I'll tell you, it always struck me as something very exciting in a way. So my husband was doing a case for in a drug matter, a narcotics matter, and he was really sold on it, and he defended this gentleman, and this gentleman, he managed to get him acquitted, and was very delighted. And I do believe that the man came back later and admitted that he'd done it.
Really?
And this he came to know later. But the point, I was so disappointed. But the point is, it was just, you just live and learn.
Yeah.
So firstly, people don't even admit. I mean, most of them will not come and say that I've murdered somebody or I've committed a theft or dacoity or something as strong as that, or even a rape for that matter. Nothing of that kind. So broadly, people don't. But as lawyers, you actually know. You do understand, because it's not only technical law. There is an understanding based on general human behavior. I mean, people have been known to be wrong. So in Talwar's case, I know everybody went wrong on the guesses, too much of exposure. But that aside, you still have a sense of who's possibly what is right and what is wrong. But you don't decide that. It's not for a lawyer to decide that. That's for the courts to decide.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you have been Additional Solicitor General, actually the only second woman to become so. You have represented union, and then you have done private matters. How's the mindset changes when you're representing government and when you're doing private matters?
It's a huge difference. It's a huge difference, because when you're working for the nation, because your commitment in your, the entire process is for that situation where you're looking at the government, as I said, the nation. So then your positions are defined to a major extent. You really can't deviate from them. Right. Plus, the weight of that decision is far more. Everything that you're doing means a fair transference of power of give or take to people. And that's not a single individual by any chance. They are policy matters broadly in one way or the other. So I think the weight of that is far heavier on you. You realize that you're sealing the fate of not a single person, but the fate of so many. And also when you have a chance to transform. So I mean, for example, in the triple talaq case that we were arguing, I mean, you felt you were into such a big horizon because you were going to transform the face of history or structures as it was and go there. For example, Khushbu's matter that I did. I mean, it's freedom of speech. Imagine at that time, you came out, this was not as, by the way, ASG, sorry, I've diverted, that was pre-ASG days. But Khushbu's matter was another one of those things where you felt freedom of speech and expression. People should be able to say what they want to without fear of repercussions. And in those cases, criminal cases were filed. But coming back to ASG, I think it was some of the greatest opportunities. I think the opportunity that you get as a law officer of the country is something that you cannot get as a private counsel, because you will be engaged only in a single case or a small case involving a few people. It doesn't go beyond that. The circumference, I mean, whether you talked about women coming in Navy, whether you talked about women coming in Air Force, women coming in Army, whether you talked about pension, whether you talked about the Augusta Westland matter, which I did for the government also. In fact, of course, the Attorney General, Venugopalji, was basically taking care of it, and I was working with him. But I was really, it's something that gave you a full opportunity to exercise your entire mindset as a nationalist as much as a lawyer. I mean, it's a dream, which is well said.
Which is that one case which is still very close to your heart when you think of it, that you did that matter, got it in your favor, or maybe it has a larger impact in society?
I mean, God has given one enough opportunities to have cases that have made a mark down your life. But I was just talking about this to my colleagues yesterday, and I was just saying, I do believe human rights cases are the one which really sends a strong message down your heart. There's nothing like those cases that really reflect down your career. But a couple of cases that I can just mention, and just two, I think it would be good enough. So one of the ones that I think I found most exciting was a Clement Shaw. This was the French ship which was sent to India to break down, and ultimately India and Bangladesh are the only two countries where you're allowed to break ships and dismantle ships. It isn't there anywhere in the world. And a lot of hue and cry happened, both politically as well as legally. And we have a whole regime under the environmental law and the judicial judge-made law, so to say, to ensure that you don't have anything thrust upon you or hazardous material as it's called. And I think the revelation of doing that entire case and the process in which it worked, which included the committees, which included not one, in fact, it included 2, 3 committees where we actually addressed them across surface, and then finally the Supreme Court, which ultimately allowed the ship to come in. And I remember when I was arguing, one of the things I argued is, look, in our country we have dismantling as a business. We allow that to happen, and it is good for the industry. While saying that, by the way, when the matter was going on, I was to go to Alang, where this shipbreaking was to happen, and I was asked to accompany the French who were going there. Finally, I couldn't because I was here. At that time, I was told that in Alang, actually the workers came out fully in support of the fact that this dismantling should happen because it was their work, it was their life. And they were provided with decent measures of protection so that they weren't exposed to material, much unlike the other hazardous materials that happened. And it was a fact, asbestos was there in the country, it's not that it wasn't. So nothing new was happening. So one of the submissions I do remember making is either we allow something as a nation or we don't. If we have it as an industry, if we need it for the industry, then we need to make it work, and then it needs to go through. And the Supreme Court did come through with that and said, well, yes, the ship can come in. But anyway, to give the counter story, ultimately, I came out of the court and my colleagues who were accompanying me suddenly looked very sad, and I said, but we won the case. They said, yes, we won the case, but now politically the ship has been asked to be sent back to France. So, I mean, after all this down the line, things happen. But another of the cases that I could mention, which is, as I said, the human rights case, was a case of a child who was adopted. And because of a circumstance such as age, it was refused that the child could go back. And ultimately, again, one of the arguments made was not as much legal as emotive before the court by me, to say that I cannot sleep at night. This child has to go to their parents. I mean, we made all the legal arguments, the Guardian and Wards Act and Lakshmikant Pandey and everything that was involved with it. But ultimately, the child was sent back. And I remember one of the biggest parties, and to date, I saw her growing up as a very happy girl and becoming a sports. And in fact, from a tiny little girl, she became a great player also. The rest, right now, I don't even know. But I know that she did well for herself. And I feel that I have, given something to society.
It gave you sense of fulfillment.
Oh, big sense, big sense. And a number of these kind of cases, I think they are the ones which give you the sense of belonging. As I said, the cases that matter to me today are something that I can do for the nation or for people. And the rest one does because it's part of our lives. But these are the cases that really go to your heart.
That's really sweet. So now you have been recently appointed as a judge at Bahrain International Commercial Court. So now this transition from a lawyer to a judge, and that to international territory. So there are 2 questions. A, how your outlook changes from being a lawyer to a judge, and how much your role as a lawyer has helped you to become a better judge. And second, how it functions differently from India, that jurisdiction, and how courtrooms in India function.
So the first question, I mean, how the role changes and how being a lawyer helps, I mean, ultimately. See, firstly, there's no question that it doesn't help, because as a lawyer, you know what you're doing before a judge, and you do see for enough time what the judges do in turn. So it gives you a sense of interactive belonging for sure. In any case, I have been an arbitrator for some time. So though not as a judge, I don't think actually I really ever wanted to become a judge in this country for some reason. I was happy being a lawyer, and I was most happy continuing in that capacity and being able to articulate what I wanted rather than to be prevented from articulating what I might feel. So anyway, that story aside. But basically, I enjoyed that experience as an arbitrator. When you become an arbitrator, then in any case, you're adjudicating, so you take on that role. So I still find being a lawyer more exciting, by the way, compared to anything. But that role gave me one more fillip to this entire role as a judge of the International Commercial Court in Bahrain. In any case, I'm working through the world as an arbitrator, on international arbitrator also, and even by now a mediator. So I think the whole exposure, there's a change. I mean, really speaking, you have to learn to address what others are telling you. But I do believe that as an arbitrator, as an international commercial court judge also, you contribute also your knowledge into the whole thing. And you're not bound only by what is being presented in front of you, because you are the final adjudicator. But I think the world across, I mean, one of the conditions that I took this assignment was because I had I could continue to be a lawyer and practice, as much as the fact that I would continue to stay in India. I am not to shift bases, but the exposure there, I mean, the whole setup is into a different domain, and the Middle East again has acquired immense significance in terms of the globe. I think the kind of investment, the kind of commerce, in fact, India has developed various corridors across in the Middle East, and we are really connecting. I mean, never mind the current war. That's a phase that we are going through, but that is part of the stakes that is involved. But Bahrain, for example, is a very neutral country otherwise, and basically has been seen as a source from between even Saudi Arabia, Middle East, Dubai, UAE. Everything really comes into focus with this, and the, so to say, the action stations are there. So, for example, you are having foreign lawyers registered now with the International Commercial Court. This court itself has been set up pursuant to a treaty with the Singapore International Commercial Court, which is the first of its kind, and Chief Justice Sundaresh Menon, who's an icon in the world on the way he's been able to set up this whole system, and it's working extremely efficiently. Because today, with internationalization, you're actually having international disputes. And the forums, the domestic courts are really not able to cope with that situation. Plus, you need a choice of law, a choice of venue, a choice of seat. So one of the methods out is of course, things like arbitration, and the other method is the international commercial courts, which have come up widely and are increasingly happening. In fact, I've been mooting now that India should have an international commercial court, and I hope that will become a reality at some point soon. But it is something that really is a master stroke on life in general, and in the increasing globalization. So you have the entire process which falls into place, the manner in which the disputes are settled, the manner in which the procedures are settled, the manner in which the stakes are settled. I think those, and the conflict of law. So the entire approach is slightly different, but you have the choice of selection, which I think makes the ultimate difference. So with that, I think can't say more, and you have the ability to be able to do it virtually at various times. You have the ability, as you have in arbitration also, you have that. So in fact, even in Dubai and all, you're having a lot of work which is happening across virtual in the DIAC courts, for example, or even the DIFC for that matter. But I think the way India is now headed in this direction, and the way that these selections have been made. So the point is, India's significance in the global sphere is what is demonstrated. It's not my appointment. It is, I would take it as India's appointment into the entire domain. And I think the whole shift around from the west to the east is the other significant part. This otherwise movement has always been this fair-skinned, let's say, approach in law, which includes, UK and US, for example. So you have this shift around, which I think means a lot in the way the power balance works.
So it brings immense pride to you that you're representing India.
Of course, I'm proud to be an Indian, and I'm proud to demonstrate to the world in general. And I like the recognition of the world in the fact that India does, and we are. There was a time when India was not marked as some significant feature in anything in a way in the world. I mean, there's a time in US when I went there to Harvard, in the bars and the pubs there, they used to play Maharajas flying on carpets, and that was what India was to people. And today, India, I mean, there's times when they didn't know where Delhi was. I went to send a mail and they didn't know where, a letter by post. They didn't literally know post. That's another story. India's post and railway has been fantastic since the times you've known, and continues to be so. But I'm saying today you are valued. In my times, again, there was no Indian who was engaged. So after Harvard, I worked for a year in America. In fact, they asked me for a permanent job. I said, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to go back to my country. But there was no Indian. And the only Indians there were those who didn't associate themselves with India. So they grew up into being more Americans than the Americans, or more English than the English. I think I like what we did, to say, we got and we worked with that system. We learned with that system. I mean, things like SCC Online and all, which you have today, we had systems like that in the 80s and worked on them. And so therefore, when today, you work, you say, all right, this is an interesting development. And of course, it's made wonders and changes. But to be in India and to be able to work those systems, I think was again something that gave you huge exposures and made you learn the way of the world and understand people as much as life and as much as international. I think today there's a whole change there. I mean, Indians are valued at every level, whether it's professionally, economically, financially, whatever is which way.
You mentioned that you're happy being a lawyer. I would like to know why most of the lawyers are reluctant to become judge. We have seen that's very common.
No, I don't want to speak for others. I know some of the reasons. I mean, some of them feel that they don't earn enough, so they don't want to make it there. Some of them feel it's binding. It does have a timeline to it.
Yeah.
Lawyers have no timeline. You can go on forever. You have the best of lawyers. I mean, whether you talk about Ram Jethmalani or you talk about Mr. K. K. Venugopal, you talk about Soli, you talk about Mr. Nariman. I mean, everybody's gone till a fair time, and I think people enjoy that. But I think you have liberty as a lawyer, which you possibly don't have liberty as a judge. You are constrained by so many things that do happen. So I guess that's one of the reasons. The other might be finance. Ultimately, though today it's much better than what it used to be, and it keeps constantly improving. But personally, it's just I wouldn't like the binding situation as far as that's concerned. I prefer to remain a little fancy free and footloose if I can. And that law does permit you to do that. And you can pretty much, I mean, there are times when people say, what are you saying? Why are you saying? And then my colleagues will come out and say, I'm just saying what I'm supposed to say and what I feel like saying, in a sense, which is justified under law.
You mentioned that even judges like finances is one of the reasons. So junior lawyers, they are often told, do not prioritize money. Look at the exposure which you are getting. But there are a lot of juniors who are coming from a background, they have financial responsibility, loans to pay back. I mean, how to make it, why are we over romanticizing struggle? And how to change that?
I know. Law has been associated like that for a long time. I'm also a first generation, by the way. I was a lawyer. But it's a fact that today it's a totally different time. The profession has become highly competitive. And people don't have the bandwidth to stay on as long as they used to. For example, in our times, 3 to 5 years minimum. 3 is also what, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Everybody thought that for the rest, half your life, it's fine if you're still struggling because you had to make it to the top. It would take some time. But today you really don't have the time to do that. And the colleagues who come across from various parts of the country, they are, for example, renting homes, they're running their own kitchens. There's a lot to be said in staying in the same city where your family is, and then that's where you grow up. Even if you're first generation, law schools have become expensive, so the entire education process has become so expensive. So you do need to bolster that up and to repay, and you don't have a system of even too many loans and everything here as you do have in, say, for example, some of the other countries. You have to pay back. So how do you survive? You can't survive. That means you're out, and that can't happen. So we really have to devise systems where it was tried earlier, by the way, and it should be tried again, to have a minimum stipend that you would give a junior so that they could actually survive. The difficulty, of course, is that change is something that is not liked, and people don't want to be bound in under that, but they should be. So you do find, for example, I'll tell you another thing that is happening at times, though juniors can't avail of it because they need at least 3 to 5 years experience. But even Government of India, for example, is devising its schedules constantly with the panels, and also that higher fees is given. You do need to support this. So you do need some kind of subsidy, loans, other facilities, fees to juniors, which needs to be circumscribed by the councils, bar councils. And this is a step forward that the bar councils will have to take, and they must take, because nobody wants to change the bandwagon. So that's a problem. But we do need to change it, because how will you let the youngsters of today? You do need a minimum literally of 2 to 3 years. That's the least that you can at least, I mean, even though I think I started at 3 months, but that's not the part. But you do need that. How do you survive the process? And it's a very tedious, expensive process, even within litigation, to have your own office, to have your own staff. I mean, how do you manage with that? Law firms are limited. There are quite a few around now, and more. By the way, I find a lot of youngsters are now engaging in practicing with each other. So for example, from in my office, 3-4 of my colleagues got together and they made their own office. Ultimately.
That's what you also did.
Yes.
Back then, with senior advocate Geeta Luthra, and back then, especially when it was very rare to have a women partnership. I think, how did you take that bold step?
Very easy. It was actually a lot of what one didn't feel bold, because you didn't think in the sense of it's something we just actually, Geeta and I have grown up from childhood. So we were the same school, and we went down the same college, and we went down the same scholarship. So she went to Cambridge, I went to Harvard on INLACS itself. And when we went into law, we decided that we will start a practice on our own. And frankly, that's all that it needed for us to kind of make it work. And everybody was fine with it. No, we didn't ask anybody's permission anyways. So we just started, and it was a great thing, because look, when you're starting out, to be able to collaborate with each other and to stand the strength, to wait for your first client, to wait for your second client, to get some money out of it, some to actually work in a situation where you're either overworked or underworked, whatever the case might be. I think it was an immense experience, and we worked for almost 25 years till we became senior advocates, and by law we had to actually have separate practices.
So, like you mentioned, that even if you see it in your own chamber, that close friends coming together, starting their own ventures, you did the same. So, what are the things which you think when close friends come in a professional setup make it works, and thing which can actually cause a failure?
Oh, there's a tremendous scope for failure. The problem is when you actually have, see, the profession is competitive, the situation is competitive. So unless you have a common interest, and the common interest has to stand for that. So that interest is monetarily as well as in terms of the brief and the briefs, so to say. So there is this, today you see it happening a lot more, the possibility of, in India, traditionally partnerships have never been hugely successful. And we've seen in number of law firms, for example, engaging in even wars and disputes, which have come out in the open. I myself have helped out a couple of them. But having said that, if there's a commonality, and in fact, larger firms on a corporate structure is one part, smaller firms is yet another part. But you really need to be somewhat similar in nature, in terms of practice, in terms of work arrangements, and in terms of answerability. You have to find somebody with whom you can click, ultimately. I mean, if you can't do that, then you can't go, and you have to have faith. And you have to have transparency in that sense between accounts and between briefs. There's also a lot of things that I think in law has one more feature in all these, partnerships. You have everybody wanting to make it on your own. So I as a lawyer, for example, would want that I have a brief, I can argue a brief, I can present it. That's the greatest thing a lawyer has, I mean, presenting. So those kind of things are also there which have to be resolved. So you have to give space to each other. In any case, I believe in life, give space to each other, have an understanding, more than anything, understanding space. If you give each other space and you have transparency, you probably can make anything work.
I think that's the secret how your 25 years worked with Ms. Luthra.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, also the confidence. I mean, as I said, we understood each other rather well. And I mean, the idiosyncrasies also and whatever else that prevailed in this. So we could work it, and we had similar value systems. Also grown up from a convent school. So you can imagine the kind of value system that we ingrained. In fact, women imbibe it far more. That's what I keep saying. Though all the moral sciences for women, the men seem to get out of moral science and work on another platform.
So outside law, what keeps you grounded?
Everything. I wish I had more time. But I like public engagement, as I said, and I do it on various surfaces. I was identified by some people as saying, you're a person who has different hats, and you have different cupboards, where you can, shelves rather, where you can be fitted into. So, I mean, I enjoy sports. I have always played from my childhood. So, tennis, hockey. Now I play a bit of golf, not enough to justify my existence, but yes, I'm a member of the golf club and I play golf and I enjoy it. I play badminton off and on, and I intend to play right now, by the way, coming in London soon on the disputes week. I enjoy things like just exercise of general nature. I enjoy swimming, I enjoy walking. I enjoy my participation in social ventures. I do a lot of that. I do a lot of social and public ventures. So, for example, I became involved in the Partition Museum. We set it up in Amritsar. Enjoyed the exposure of dealing with people who come from the partition times, going back to history. Our whole evolution is, so to say, and of course I am a post-partition product. But you want to go back to that history where our parents came from and where our nation came from and the struggle. So enjoy that venture of, in fact, putting it up literally piece by piece, standing there while everything was being put up, and a lot of support by the state as well as by NGOs, as well as some of our friends and whoever helped in the process, because a lot of funding had to come from well-wishers. And so now it's an absolutely great project at the footsteps of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. So that kind of venture. I like reading. I like writing. I've done a few books which have come forth, and I enjoy some of our festivals. So I've been very active with the literary festivals. So recently I was in Nainital for the literary festivals, a mountain of echoes, or echoes of mountain, whatever, sorry. But huge. It was so great to be out there, Jaipur Lit Fest. So I enjoy going for that and then involving myself with music, with books, with people, with different thinkers. I mean, the best of writers. I enjoyed it in London too, for that matter, with the Lit Fest. So there's enough and more, and just spending time. I like films. I don't see enough of them. I saw Devil Wears Prada yesterday night. I went out for it. And by the way, half the cinema hall was with lawyers and judges. So just to tell you that lawyers and judges do have a life. It was a Friday evening. So it was unusual. I told everyone in the office, I'm leaving. I'm going for a film today. That's what I do. But it was after almost 6 months that I've gone for a film.
But so it's very, so overall growth, it's very important that you have to engage with other activities as well. You cannot restrict yourself, giving time, just working, going back home, then starting again. That cycle needs to be broken. Usually, that's what happens with lawyers who are engaged with law firms.
Well, I mean, look, honestly, I think lawyers have learnt, I have learnt, we have learnt, at least to adapt our rest of our lives along with that. So you build it around. You just can't make it complete exclusives. It's not that this is now my exclusive time. That I'm afraid as lawyers, most of us can't do. I know the younger generation wants it. In my private life, in my public life, हमारी life सब mixed है. It's not balance at all. No balance. None. No attempt also at balance. The idea is just to get going and to move it. So you just keep accommodating yourself. So I said yesterday, I just said, all right, I'm going. And honestly, I started with the swim, went for a film, had dinner with friends. And that's the way the evening wound up. And then whatever else happens to the rest. But you're not able to do it all the time. So you seek constant engagement. You're always defaulting. Another thing that a woman must learn is, I can't be perfect. I am not perfect. I wasn't made to be perfect. I was made to be good, but not perfect. I can't be. I can't do every role as best as anybody else can. So I keep defaulting, as I was saying, and by now I'm okay with it. I said, fine, I made the whole family and everybody else also. Probably they all understand it. Ki, theek hai. There will be lack of delivery at times. So, theek hai, karenge. Even in X field or Y field, if you engage in so many activities. And as I said, I engage in public engagements. I'll go give talks. I'll participate in conferences. And with that, you have a professional life. The professional life is even more demanding now. So, your entire life really revolves around that. And your attempt is isolating and saying, I want this space out on my own. You want it, but theek hai. You get it sometimes, and you get it in between. It's just that it's not independent and exclusive. It's not a cut zone, saying, okay, now this is it and this is it. It doesn't happen.
Before we started recording, you mentioned about your stint at Doordarshan. We would like to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a strong love for being out there in the open. My father was a film distributor, so I was in so to say, in the film world. I had some exposure there too. But basically, down by schooling itself, I was a strong debater. Declamations are also, as they were called at that time. I don't know if that word still exists. But having said that, again, in terms of various leadership courses. So anyway, I don't even remember how I got the opportunity, but I did. So Yuvavani was the youth section of Doordarshan at that point of time. So I went in for that. You had to go through an audition and things like that. And I finally started, and I really enjoyed it. So we do these huge spools, not like this modern mechanism that you have. And actually, we weren't allowed to use bad words also. Slang words are not allowed. Very different times and ages. So we used to edit out the spools and stuff. So along Doordarshan, along television, I later went on to become the spokesperson for BJP. So I was in television for about 10 years almost. I was on television for various programs one way or the other, almost 4 to 5 a day as an average. I even landed up doing my own anchoring for Legal Balance. So Doordarshan asked me to do a program, which was a legal program. And again, by the way, those days when we had dot matrix printers and we had editing. So it wasn't live, which is, by the way, live is so much better. You don't have to edit. Whatever happens, and it's over with. Otherwise, see, now your face is not looking good. Now the statement didn't come through clearly. There was a pause in your sentence. Okay, there was a pause. That's natural existence.
Authenticity goes away.
It does, but actually my editor was terrific. So he was really good. He showed me some of my off-camera moments, by the way. He would keep sending them to me, say, this is what you did. Just as expressions and faces. But it's great fun. It lacks authenticity, but those were the times when you believed in more, perfection as in an acceptance. Today, natural is perfection more than the other. So times change. You evolve this, but as I said, I've enjoyed these experiences. Being an anchor is definitely a little more demanding at times than a speaker, because speaker you're addressing, but the anchor is thinking of what to do and how to do as you're thinking when you speak to me now. But I've done it on the screen, I've done it on Doordarshan as much as on radio. So I had various opportunities to have great times. I mean, it's just exposure to life. Done podcast. I recently did the elections in the High Court. So we decided to do a podcast. So just did that. It was great fun having different candidates coming with their viewpoints and taking that across to the people.
So now, having such varied experience, what success means to you now than your earlier, younger version?
Success still means that I must get my excitement. I mean, that's a minimum that I expect. And I think now success in a way also identifies itself to what it means for you to believe that you get in the sense of achievement. And now achievement targets have changed. One is success as traditionally understood by everybody, as to say, all right, you've got X number of briefs in a day and you earn X amount of money, and which car you have and which house you have and whatever else that means. The other success is what it means to you in a personal way, what gives you satisfaction. So there are some now key areas that do give you more satisfaction than others. And then you're constantly evolving to say, all right, even criteria. So sometimes this work-life balance, which you keep trying to adapt. So you keep targeting around to those kind of features. But I mean, life is constantly evolving, and that's the meaning of life. So therefore, you have to adapt yourself to different needs, people. You're dealing with them, your command with them, your interaction with them. So I think that rewarding experience is something which is inherently individualistic, and you do get that onto various levels. So as I said, I enjoyed the Partition Museum, seeing the brick by brick go up, and seeing that, all right, you made something, you created something. That creation is an achievement by itself. Even a brief, and one of those is a creation. I worked a lot, for example, by the way, on matters which involved anti-GMOs. So I worked with Navdanya, which is a NGO working on with Vandana Shiva. I really enjoyed that experience, because just seeing that the country gets good food, good nutrition, we avoid the typical commercial way of the West, so to say. In fact, we are all now going towards it, going towards the East as much as anything else goes. So I said these are the targets, and they keep evolving from time to time. They even translate, they even change. I mean, you can manage some things, you can't manage some things, you manage some different directions. But what I've enjoyed always from my childhood is doing a variety of things. I love doing different things. I can't just stay stable on doing one. So Vipassana is not for me, for example. I don't see that happening very easily. So yesterday only somebody was telling me, ma'am, you need to do Vipassana. I said, I'm not sure. I'm not ready. Wait. I will do it at some point. Because I believe I should be able to do anything. So karna to chahiye. But in the meantime, we just work with what we can. And I enjoy new challenges, new directions. And I think that gives you the maximum vibration in your life.
Thank you so much. Conversation with you have been really insightful and thoughtful. And it was a privilege speaking with you. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. Enjoyed myself.
Thank you.